Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoy video. Ryan here with my follow-up to our most recent Math Hammer video that we did covering the changes for Stormcast units going from 3.0 to 4.0. Now I'll be looking at our other launch box army, of course, which went on pre-order today. The date of recording is Skaven, obviously. And then I'll be doing one more with Lumineth, hopefully getting that in before we see the indexes in full for everyone. I'm happy to do other units, as I mentioned in my other video. If anyone really wants to see some other units, list it down in the comments, and if I get the time, I'll try to do a side-by-side comparison for just a mishmash of what else people want to see. But in general, I have a feeling that this comparing units from the old Warscrolls to the new Warscrolls is only necessary for a few armies to kind of get a feeler for what GW had in mind when kind of switching the roles of different units from one edition to the other. Also including how things like monsters have been changed with their profiles. I call it the monsterification of their hit rolls into wound rolls, being usually -1 to hit and +1 to wound from what they often used to be. And in other different kind of role specifications to kind of further ingrain that a unit should be functioning this kind of role in the minds of the players out there, instead of them all basically being kind of interchangeable. So anyway, thanks again for all the positive feedback on the last video. I'm really looking forward to 4th edition, and now that I am officially done playing 3rd edition, now that World Singles is over. If I saw you guys there this week or this weekend, it was great meeting some people that have been following the channel. Thanks so much for the support. Really can't be more excited about 4th edition right now. And yeah, just do all that normal like, sharing, and subscribing down below. It really helps boost the channel. We're almost at 3,000 subscribers, so thank you so much for everyone that's been on this journey with us. And without further ado, let's get into the Skaven content. Okay, so as before, I want to cover a couple ground rules. I'll go through this a little quicker maybe if you're watching all the videos. So I'm only looking at Warscrolls that we've seen thus far that are either leaked or that GW featured in their faction focuses or other articles. And I'm also only looking at rules we've seen. So Skaven got a little more complicated than Stormcast because Skaven has a lot of buffs that you're expecting to see from specific other units or other abilities that may or may not be missing now. Now, we know what all the battle traits are, but we don't necessarily know what all the artifacts, heroic traits, maybe mount traits, and spells are. So it's hard to say exactly what we're missing, plus what's on the other Warscrolls. So, for example, a big one here are the Warpstone Sparks that Squire units used to be able to use. Most notably, adding 1 to the damage characteristic of 3 different shooting units in the melee or missile units in the shooting phase. We don't know if that kind of thing is still in the game. At least I don't. So I've tried to take that into account as best I can. I'm only again here concerned with missile or melee output, not magic, and not other functions of what Warscrolls are bringing to the table. So people have said, we're focusing a lot on this. From my kind of statistics and data background, that's the most computational part of a Warscroll. So it's the easiest one to kind of lock down. But it goes without saying, as per the following point, that there's also value to be found in the non-output related rules. So don't let this discourage you from using a unit. In fact, sometimes tankiness of a unit, which we're not taking into account at all on these, or these analyses that I'm doing here in this video, has a huge role to play. Also, your movement and movement shenanigans like teleporting and deep striking that you can get up to are also very crucial to winning your games and bring a lot of value to the table, even if the apparent melee or missile output seems to be lacking or got nerfed from what it used to be. I'm also assuming that points are staying roughly proportionate to what they used to be per unit within an army, given that all points are probably going to go up something like 10 to 20%. Some units are going to come out better than others, of course, but that's, going to be GW's initial wave of evaluations of how strong that unit should probably be, and then they'll adjust them as we've seen this week with regular battle scrolls and points updates. And of course, here I'm mainly concerned with the percentage of improvement to their output. Someone in the comments last time said they'd really like to see the net actual like difference, not in percent, but literal how many more mortal wounds or wounds effectively they're doing against a given save that each unit had. But that just was going to be too much work for what I'm trying to cover with these. And what I'm really trying to say is, if we can look at percentages, then we have a better sense of what GW is doing for heroes on average, for monsters on average, and so forth, as we compare them across armies. So if you know what the percentages are looking like, you can just apply that to what you know of your own army. Gross output, I'm more interested in when we look at the actual war scrolls in the context of the whole army compared to all armies. But it goes without saying here that if a hero gets a 25% output improvement, that's a whole lot less valuable than some unit that you can reinforce and that like has, you know, a really good delivery mechanism, because heroes often don't get in combat. So conversely, if a hero gets nerfed 25% with their melee output, it also has a lot less of an impact than if a big unit that used to be a melee hammer gets reduced by 25%. Anyway, I hope all that is clear to everyone. Let's go ahead and move on to our lowly Clanrats. So I'll put Spearhead Warscrolls up if needed in these videos, because I'm just trying not to use too many things that didn't come from GW sources, like weird, you know, potato quality screenshots of rules that were supposed to not be having photos taken of them. But anyway, so Clanrats, the only thing that's really different from the Warscroll, the Spearhead Warscroll here that we're seeing that's important, is that they got auto wound on crit 6s to hit. But anyway, let's cover it. So what changed here? They're just one profile now. And as I mentioned in the next bullet point, I'm comparing their current profile, the 4.0 profile, to the 3.0 profile, to their better old 3.0 profile, because this unit always had access to, I said good rend here, I meant good, good reach, as in range. Sorry, I was thinking another R word there. So excuses there, apologies. But range is what I mean, because they used to have a battle trait that made it so that for every 10 models you had in a Skaven unit, so they started at MSU like size of 20, you're getting plus 1 inch worth of range to a max of 3 in total. So a 20 MSU 20 size, you know, Clanrats unit was already sitting at 3-inch range, so I didn't think it was worth choosing the weapon that had 2-inch range built in, unless you were taking these in 10s maybe, but even then I don't think I would. So we're comparing it to the better profile, and if we do so, they got plus 1 attack, but minus 1 to wound, and they gained crit auto wound. Now if we look at the chart to the bottom right, you'll see that this is how we used it before, I was using before. The scale on the left-hand column there is going to be on the basis of what we're actually seeing the unit being. So don't think you can just visually compare each one of these graphs to each other. It's not going to be directly comparable because I didn't normalize or standardize the scale there. But anyway, you can see that because they got plus 1 attack and plus 1 wound and the rend didn't change, their profile is just consistently just a little bit better than 120% better. So a little bit more than double what they used to have. Now, I love talking about what auto wounding does, since that's like a more common ability now. Auto wounding functionally has the best improvement for a war scroll percentage-wise if they had a bad to wound roll. Now, they did get minus 1 to wound, putting them on 5s to wound instead of 4s, but if you get those 6s, then it's basically skipping the crappy to wound roll, and it's adding the same amount of value it would be adding if someone had a 2+ to wound, in terms of it just skips over that wound roll. So how bad your wound roll was, I'll do a Math Hammer video on this at some point, like a breakdown of how this works visually, makes a bigger improvement. So what we're seeing here is a huge buff to Clanrats, actually. Of course, they're not getting all that extra range that used to be unique to them before, but that's built into all war scrolls now, and their save didn't get any worse. So and the resurrection ability. So I'm feeling pretty good about Clanrats. I think their points will probably have to go up though because of it, because we don't see a whole lot of like cheap chaff units putting out this much work, at least thus far in what we've seen in the faction focuses. All right, so let's, and just for clarity's sake, let's look at the chart. The 6 means against the 6 plus save, 5 plus save, 4 plus save, 3 plus save, 2 plus save, and then the expected value EV average is just taking a flat uniform average of those 5, not weighted based off of what I think you might see. And again, like I mentioned last time, even though we might say, well, a 3-up is more common than a 5-up because you might be doing all-out defense, my point is that we have less ways to buff your save. So to save stack in the game, as far as we can tell, no Mystic Shield. All-out defense is a command ability, but you can only use it once, just as before. And there are so many other great command abilities that you'll be fighting that'll be fighting for your command limited resources of command points. Things like counter charge, covering fire, magical intervention, and then of course things like redeploy, rally, whatever. You've got so many options now. I definitely don't think you're going to be seeing as many 4-up saves going to 3-up saves as we're used to. Anyway, let's keep going. All right, so looking at a regular non-spearhead Warscroll here, let's go to Rat Ogors, one of our better examples of a melee unit. So I'm going to look at their missile profile first. So let's see what changed. Now, the last bullet point is actually perhaps the most important, so I'll get that out of the way first. We're now looking at units of 3 instead of 2, which means we used to get 1 out of every 2 models got a ranged weapon, and now it's 1 out of every 3. So to do a fair comparison, what I did was assume that we were using 6 models. So double reinforcing in 3rd edition a unit of 2, so that you got it up to 1 out of every 2 of those guys. Now, let me double check real quick when I'm looking at that. Yeah, it was still 1 in every 2. It wasn't 1 per unit. So that means that if we double reinforce, so triple the size of a Rat Ogre unit in 3rd edition, it has the same amount of models as what we now have if we single reinforce, which is the most you can do. So doubling the size of a unit, and you'd still have 6 models in total. And then if assuming the price point is roughly the same between those, again, points need to be controlled for in this comparison. But basically, we're essentially comparing 3.0 versions of the shooting profile to 4.0 versions. So in theory, the 4.0 version should be at a disadvantage here. But yet, as you can see in the graph, they come out with a much better profile, even though they're at a disadvantage. So why? Well, they went from D3 attacks per model to 2D6. So of course, if I'm doing 3, we're looking at 3 in the 3.0 version of the world, 3D3, which on average is 6, versus 2 times 2D6, so 4D6, which on average is 14 attacks. So it just has a huge amount of attacks potential there. They also got +2 to hit. It used to be 4+ to hit and -1 to wound, but that balances out to still a buff. They now have 1 better rend at rend 2, but -1 damage. They used to have 2 damage. So that makes a big impact, but the attacks make up for it a good bit. So overall, you're seeing that the profile gets considerably better. It starts, even against a 6+ save, because of that extra rend and everything, it's starting at already like a 133% or so, something like that, maybe 125% increase there. And then it just keeps getting better at better saves compared to what it used to be, even despite the disadvantage I said of how many you had in the unit. And on average, it's a little bit better than 150% better. So pretty impressive. So they're actually doing some decent shooting stuff. They don't have the Scryer keyword, just the Moulder keyword, so I don't know if any Scryer abilities that are going to buff shooting is going to apply to this unit. And of course, they don't need all-out attack because they already have 2s to hit. So, but it's still a good profile. I'm still decently excited about it. Now, let's skip over to what their melee situation is looking like. And just as before, sorry for the 6+, 5+, all that in the middle there that is covered up by one of the graphs. I'm not a Excel whiz. I know how to make it work, but the graphic stuff, I don't know how to make this look better. I could have split it into 2 different graphs, but I thought I'd want to put it here. Oh, and we lost the legend for some reason. So just so you know, the blue is always going to be like our base level, and then the orange is going to be when we're getting some extra stuff going on. And in this case, that's the ability, the Unleash Warp Fury ability that you're seeing in the Warscroll on the screen, that if they take some risk here by taking D3 mortal damage, then you're adding 1 to the attack's characteristic of this unit's melee weapons for the rest of the turn. You can do that every turn. So, what are we looking at here? Overall, they got +1 attack in general from what they used to have base. -1 to hit, and then again, I'm controlling here for how many models are in the unit, which would be 6, of course, because this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter whether the champion's in the unit, or I'm calling him a champion, but the guy with a gun, that was an addition to their other weapons, so it's functionally the same. But they got, so +1 attack, -1 to hit. They traded exploding hits for a +1 attack risk, as I was saying, and they lost. Now, this is kind of a point to talking about what other synergies they had, but there used to be from the Packmasters, and the Master Moulder had an ability that could give them +1 to wound, in addition to some movement buffs, I believe. So we don't know if they lost that for sure. I haven't taken that into account here, but obviously this would diminish the amount of the positive difference that we're seeing in orange if they did in fact totally lose that, and if they and then with the base quality, it would increase how much of a nerf they got. But what we're seeing here is on average compared to the Rat Ogres before, they got like about 6% worse. A little nerfed in combat, but in the realm, in like the scope of what we've seen with nerfs to units in 4th edition coming from 3rd, that's not a bad decrease at all, and I still think they do what they need to do. Plus their shooting profile is decent and can shoot in combat, which is not a given anymore, which means you will be consistently be able to get these guys in combat and still keep using their shooting ability. And then the orange profile is when they do the damage to themselves. You can see that they actually go up to about a 12.5% improvement across all saves, which is great. So I think as long as you can take that risk. Now, if they've only got 4 health, so if you've only got 1 health left on a model, basically, I don't know if it's worth it, because then you have to calculate for, well, I just lost 5 attacks to gain +1 attack on each of the other models. So obviously, if you had a unit of 6, you lost a dude, so you lost 5 whole attacks. Just to put 1 extra attack on the other guys, it comes out even, right? So then you have to do kind of a risk-reward kind of evaluation there. But if you have no wounds on the unit, there's no risk of losing them. I would do it, because that's how Skaven should play, generally speaking. All right, let's move on. So Stormfiends, gosh, I almost don't want to talk about this unit because I have like kind of a love-hate relationship with it. I really don't like the way GW implemented their, you choose this or you choose this. It's complicated, and even I have to go back and remind myself all of the different combinations you can make. Basically, as you can see here, you're choosing between, say, the first example, one of the 3 models can be Warp Fire Projectors, which is the 3rd shooting option there, with Clubbing Blows, which is the default melee option if you don't have a specific one. And then you can choose either between that or Wind Launchers and Clubbing Blows. So in any case, they're both got Clubbing Blows. You're not making a choice there. But you are choosing between Warp Fire Projectors and Wind Launchers. Now, what I'm not doing here is comparing all of the different combinations you can have in this unit. That's a video for another time. What I'm comparing it to is the any given weapon option with what it used to be. So I'm going to start with the rattling cannons and the wind launchers, the new versions compared to the old versions. All right. So the rattling now is at -1 to hit from what it used to be. The rest is the same. The wind launchers are at 1 worse rend. I'm saying that would be -1 in the new terminology, but before we had to say like decrease the rend or whatever. So it's worse. Let's just put it that way. And the wind launchers lost +1 to wound rolls versus units that have 10 or more models in them. It's also worth pointing out that all of the shooting profiles here, except for Warp Fire Projectors, so these 2, lost shooting in combat, which they always used to have. So that's also a nerf, considering this unit has a very mixed identity. It doesn't know if it wants to be shooting, if it wants to be in combat, or if it wants to be both. And the fact that only one of the profiles is shooting combat kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Now, if we go down to the list here, so what we're looking at is blue is rattling cannons, and then we've got the wind launcher at base, and then the wind launchers now versus what they used to be against 10 models or more. Now, so what you're seeing, let's look at just the Rattling. The Rattling stayed flat at a minus 25% performance improvement because it had a minus 1 to hit from 3 plus to a 4 plus. That's just how the math works out on that. So those got worse. Then the Wind Launcher base is the orange. Now you might say, well, I don't see orange for the first two columns. That's because it was a 0% difference. It didn't change. Because of the rend issue. They have the same functional output on those two, because nothing else changed about its profile when it's not getting the +1 to wound versus 10 or more models, which is not what we're looking at. But then it starts to get worse increasingly as the save value gets better. And then the Wind Launcher with versus 10 plus with the +1 to wound, you can see that it's at least 20% worse and then just keeps getting worse. So I think this is a sad day for the shooting version of the units. That said, shooting is getting nerfed in the game. And of course, with covering fire, if you really want with this unit, you can be putting shooting out in your opponent's turn. That said, the ranges aren't super generous, but, you know, it is what it is. I personally wish they had said, scrap what we used to say with how this unit works. You can make a shooting version. You can mix and match things however you like. You can kind of make a shooting version. You could do this. Maybe they had points values attached to it, but I really would have liked to have seen a all shooting Stormfiends and all melee Stormfiends or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, let's move on to the next profile, and then I'm going to take a little pause here to drink. Okay, so warp fire projectors. I got something in my throat. Sorry, guys. God, this weapon has got a weird kind of storyline going on here. As I said before, I'm trying to kind of tell a story with each of these Warscrolls. And I feel like the changes we're seeing are kind of letting us know where GW thinks things should be. And as we know, mortal wounds are now, as they're known, mortal damage, is really getting changed. It's getting reduced. So I wouldn't take this to be too much of a nerf, in the sense that they're trying to get rid of mortal damage in general or diminish it. And so what we're going to see with this profile is it no longer does mortal wounds on 4+ per model in the target unit you're shooting at, which of course was amazing. So like, yeah, it was really good against hordes, especially on people like Thanquol and the, Thanquol especially, because he could take up to 4 instances of this weapon on the model, which is really neat. You were doing, I think, on average 2 mortal wounds per model, which was insane. But anyway, so we're just not going to see that kind of thing anymore. Instead, it's got a normal profile. So if we look at what the profile is, the last missile profile here we got, it's, 2d6 attacks, so on average 7. At hitting on 2s, great. So all-out attack doesn't help here. The thing that sucks, though, is you probably want to do it with the other guys in the unit. So all-out attack would be great. Like, I'd almost rather they have said this is 3s and 3s, right? So that at least the all-out attack would be helping the warp fire projector, but it's just not. I think the 2+ to hit, though, is meant to represent that it's fire and there's not much you can do to avoid it. And then the 4+ to wound, there's nothing to compare this to because it didn't used to work like this. But one way to think of it is kind of, well, before it used to just do 4+ per model and it did a mortal wound. So in that sense, you could say, well, then it had like unlimited rend. Now it's got down to -2, which against hordes, of course, is probably going to get through, especially if they've got a 5+ save or worse, of course. And then the wound roll is functionally the 4+ that we used to see. So instead, it's gotten nerfed down to, now we have another filter step, even if you don't count for the save roll, that's the 2+ to hit instead of what functionally would have been an auto hit, if you want to look at it that way, and just comparing what the profile looks like now. Now, of course, it can do up to 12 attacks worth, which could spike and end up being, more than the amount of models that were in the unit before. But then once you account for the hit roll and the fact that the attacks are just not doing as much, you're probably not rolling on average, anywhere near 12. You're getting 7, sometimes even lower. So what we're looking at here, in the chart below, what I said was, I'm going to take this against a specific number of models. And I can tell you right now, if you do it against one model, the new profile is way better than what it used to be on average. it's doing something like 4 to 5 times more output. So depending on what the save is, it gets worse from there, but it still is way better. So if a warpfire projector was just shooting into a random model back then, just one model, it definitely is better now. So I just skipped ahead to versus 3 models, because you can see that that's roughly the expected value average. So the blue column the column at the end there, but looking at the blue bar, is roughly around 50% better than what it used to be across all saves. Then against 5 models, we see that it's gotten a little bit worse. And of course, these are common unit sizes. Like if you're against an MSU of 3 models, you're against an MSU of 5 models, it's gotten a little worse. But 10 models is where it really tanks. The expected value average there is around a 50% performance decrease across all saves. Now, and my last point here was this has strong implications for Thankful and the Warpfire Thrower weapons team. And we don't even know if those exist anymore, but Thankful, of course, is still modeled. The model stays. It's not getting squatted, so he's still going to have all the guns. So that means I could see maybe a world where you might want the other armament for Thankful, depending on how this ends up being and what kind of function the rest of the Warscroll has. Okay, so that's only finishing the missile profile for Stormfiends, but now we need to look at the melee. Now, I've separated them into the 2 profiles that are nerfed, which would be the clubbing blows, which is just the standard weapons profile for if you take like a missile weapon, or the grinder fists. Now, they don't have the same output. That's not my point here. My point is that they have the same proportional decrease, which is around a 6% decrease, whether it's the clubbing blows or the grinder fists. And for those that are in the know, grinder fists are the ones that allow the unit to deep strike, basically. But anyway, then the shock gauntlets had the big decrease, but we'll cover why. So the clubbing blows have -1 attack, but got +1 to wound. So, that's something, I guess. But of course, like I said, it's a net decrease of output across all saves. The grinder fists, I just wanted to shorten it there, is -1 to hit, but +1 to wound. So getting kind of monster-fied, which we see across all of the melee profiles here, where they're all at 4+ to hit, 2+ to wound. And otherwise it's the same. So it also got around a 6% decrease. But the shock gauntlets lost -1 to hit, and then got +1 to wound. So same profile, but this makes a big difference on this unit, because if I cross-reference with the old versions of this unit, the shock gauntlets, they always had the exploding hits do D6. So not exploding hits, it's like if you roll crit 6, then it does D6 hits, a D6 to wound rolls, it like multiplies. And of course, if the the +1 to wound you would think would actually have a bigger impact here, but for whatever reason, it just ends up really suffering. Let me take a look at that profile, because something seems like it's a little off for me. Same, yeah, 4 -1, 2. Let's go look at the Excel, might as well. So if I come over here, and we scroll down to the Stormfiends, looking at the shock gauntlet. This is the old version here. So just looking at the math, you know what? I got this wrong, so forgive me on this. I think they actually are going to have a buff. So ignore everything I just said. I'm just now seeing it, because you know what I forgot to take into account here was that they still kept the ability. So I take back everything I said. In fact, we can even update it live. Let's do that. How about that? So what I'll do is, because this is still the same profile, they kept the same number of attacks, the same to hit. What I'm going to do, actually they got -1 to hit. So I'm just going to compute this by taking the old profile here. And so what did I say? So the new profile, is -1 to hit. So I'm going to reduce this top part here to being 2 out of 6. But it got +1 to wound. So it's 5 out of 6. And then now we can actually see that this is now up to 533, right? Now, if I just go back to what it used to, and this stays the same, by the way. Oh, no, I need to change this too. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare and contrast this row right here. I'm just going to copy this. How am I going to do this? I'm going to copy this data. Copy. And I'm going to do a special paste where I just paste this in here. Paste special. I'm just going to copy the values. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to revert this back to what it used to be. So you're seeing this live, guys. I guess that's something of a treat. Now, I'm not 100% sold that this is entirely correct, but if we look at it across the board here, it looks like it got hit with a similar output decrease here. It's definitely closer than what it used to be. My apologies that it's looking like that, but you can see that now this is the range. Even though it looks more extreme, it's just a little bit worse than what happened to the other guys. If I see something, I'll drop it in the comments below. This is my bad for missing this because I missed this part right here. That's still on the Warscroll. But anyway, you can ignore this guy right here and just think of it like this. In any case, it's still, as far as the math that I'm seeing here, is still about a 6 to 7% decrease. So it's not as bad as I thought. So anyway, good. I caught myself live. That's pretty fun for me. All right, here we go. So let's look at the Doomflayer, though. The Doomflayer did get buffed. So, all right. So what happened here? The Doomflayer got, it used to be 2d3 attacks to going to a flat 5. Now, obviously, 2d3 is on average 4 attacks. And so it functionally got a +1 attack on average, but it could have maxed out at 6, and now it's at a flat 5. But it did lose its +1 attack on the charge. So it used to be able to get up to this on average, but it had to be on a conditional basis of having charged. Now, it's got -1 to hit and +1 to wound on the new stuff, is exactly what I said. And then it gained +1 damage on the charge instead of +1 attack. So what we're looking at here in the blue is that on base, the Doomflayer got around a like 16 2/3 probably improvement, a little bit of a boost there. And then if it's on the charge, so the max was on the charge compared to its old max of it being on the charge where it got +1 attack, so it's +1 damage now versus +1 attack, it's around a 41% improvement. So the problem here is you might say, well, there's one, if I go for a melee heavy build, let's see, so what would the balance be? We would have had, I wrote this down to kind of have a summary here. If you want to get the most melee output, you would choose the Grinder Fists instead of the Rattling Cannon. And for the other gun, I guess you would choose for Warp Fire Projector now because it can shoot in combat, so that kind of feels like it's still encouraging melee stuff and being close range instead of the Wind Launchers. And then you would choose the Doomflayer over the Shock Gauntlet every day, all day, every day, as far as I'm concerned, especially if you're expecting to get yourself on the charge. I suppose there's a comparison to be made otherwise. But if you're going for that version of it, then what you're really thinking about here is how is the output here looking? Is that Doomflayer being the only melee profile that got a buff enough to make up for the other one? And this is where the percentages are not what we want to be looking at. What we really want to be looking at is as one of our commenters in the last video said, the actual amount of damage difference, which is something I'm happy to make in another video once we get all the rules out. Maybe I'll do a whole video on Stormfiends and then comparing all the different possible weapon options, including all the buffs they could receive. Kind of like we did with the swords and size for Sylvaneth Kurnoth Hunters. So anyway, sorry that this went on so long. It's just a really complicated war scroll, and it's going to happen. All right, let's move on in the interest of time. So I grouped the Master Moulder and Gray Seer on foot here together. I can cover this real quick because the Gray Seer didn't change at all, which is why we don't even see an orange bar. This is in terms of its melee output. In fact, the rest of the Warscroll didn't change all that much either, except maybe that he's a one caster now, maybe, which is definitely a nerf. For the Master Moulder, he used to have 2 profiles. They merged them. He gained exploding hits, but at the same time, the way that the expected value was actually the same for the old profiles before. They just had different ways of getting that same expected value, so one was swingier than the other. And overall, he just has like a 1/6 decrease of output. But again, this guy's not really trying to get into combat. And then if we're looking at, and the Gray Seer, like I said, didn't change. All right, now I'm going to lump the Engineer and Jezzails for 2 reasons. One, they are a power pair because the Engineer allows the Jezzails to ignore the non-targetability targetability aspect of the guarded hero rule, which is like the new lookout sir, but doesn't ignore the -1 to wound or hit as far as I'm aware. But anyway, in addition, the Jezzails Warscroll we had was not shared by GW, so I didn't want to put a leaked thing on here. So I'm first going to look at the shooting and then melee profile of the Warlock Engineer, which is less important, and then go on to the Jezzails. So starting with the shooting profile for the Warlock Engineer, the missile profile lost an attack, but its damage went from 1 to D3, so on average double, but could spike and get 3, or could, dip under and stay the same. So in that case, it would be a nerf, but on average, it's a buff. And he's got crit auto wound now, which, again, like I said about the Clanrats, because his wound roll is a 3+, it's less important that he's got that ability than it would be if he had a really bad wound roll, because it could still go through even if you don't get crits. But anyway, so it's not as much of a buff for this kind of unit. What's not shown on my evaluation here is the possibility of using a Warpstone Spark, which would give him +1 damage, which would have brought his damage up to the average of the D3 now. So, and if we take into account that, it could be that the guy isn't actually getting any better. That said, there was a risk he could get hurt from doing that, of course. Of course, he can also do that with his new ability here, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of his Warscroll. On a 2+, you can bump him up to 3 instead of D3 damage, which then is what I'm looking at here for the orange category. So that would be kind of like using a Warpstone Spark in effect, but then there's risk. And it's actually the same risk, because it was a 1 in 6 chance that he would take D3, except the Warpstone Spark could be used on 3 units by only taking risk on 1 unit. So it's long story, too long didn't read. This is what we're seeing, is that roughly a 50% output without using any abilities, and then going up to damage 3, we're looking at a little over 120%. And then we'll see if Warpstone Sparks exist in some way or the other. And if anyone's really curious, I can talk about that comparison later. And then melee, the base profile here, as you can see, it used to be D3 attacks to 3 attacks now. So it on average went up by 1, but it's fixed, so it's stable. So all around an improvement, or at least not a nerf. It can't ever get worse. The melee is -1 to wound, and the rend got 1 worse. The melee damage went up by 1, but he lost a kind of risk that you could take to get D6 attacks. I never thought it was worth it. It was always like a suicide thing, because if you rolled 1s to hit, I think it was, you took D3 mortal wounds. It just didn't seem like it was worth it unless you knew you were going to die. But anyway, so if he's not using any of those attacks, he does have a better melee output now on average, a good bit better than it used to be. But again, you probably don't want this guy in combat. And then if you're comparing it to the old risk thing, it is only better now against bad saves. But of course, it could have killed him. Let's move on to the Jezzails, though, because that's what really matters. So in missile, the missile profile got +1 attack, but -1 to hit. They lost, I could say they traded their crit mortals, which would do, I think it was just flat 2, or equivalent to their damage characteristic. Let me double check that real quick. It was just flat 2, yeah. So, which didn't interact well with the Warpstone Sparks, because the Warpstone Sparks would bump it up to 3, but the crits back then didn't follow in line with what your damage characteristic was. It just said flat 2. So, that actually wasn't as much of an improvement as it would be now if there's something equivalent. But anyway, they lost crit mortals to have auto wound, which again on a to wound roll of 3+ is less important. I also mentioned they lost +1 damage from Sparks, the Warpstone Sparks, because we don't know. But I did take those into account in the thing here, because this was obviously the unit you'd want to use Warpstone Sparks on. I'll talk about their melee in a second. So their base output across all saves compared to what they used to be is, and this was not being stationary, by the way, because they used to get +1 to hit from being stationary. And now they get the, like an equivalent, they don't get +1 to hit, it's just built into the Warscroll. Or maybe I'm missing that really quick. Let me double check, because I'm flying through this stuff here. While I'm talking about that, though, you can see that the base profile is better, the stationary profile is better, and then against best seen, meaning when they got to use all the stayed stationary and they got the Warstone Sparks, it's only a little bit of an improvement, but it's still an improvement. So just trying to keep that honest there. Of course, their range got reduced, but I'm not taking that kind of stuff into consideration in these videos. So just to fact check myself here, yes, they got +1 attack, -1 to hit, same wound, same rend, same damage, but now they've got crit auto wound instead of crit mortals, and then they used to have an ability that gave them +1 to hit, so it was putting them on 2s to hit instead of 3s. So that was functionally +2 when they were, +2 to hit when they were staying stationary versus what they are now. Obviously, this is a great unit to use all-out attack on. And because they come in 3s, I think you can reinforce them now, which they used to not be able to do. They used to be artillery units, which couldn't be reinforced, so they always came in just flat 3s, could never be bigger. So if you used an all-out attack on a unit, it only applied to 3, and now it can apply to 6, if I'm not mistaken with how the game works. So overall, I think this unit actually is a good bit better than it used to be. And again, considering mortal wounds have been pulled out of the game a good bit, I wouldn't read too much into that. Their melee, I didn't put into the chart because it lost -1 to wound, which made them lose 33% flat across all saves. But you don't want this unit to be in melee, so I wouldn't worry about it, especially considering they can't shoot in combat anymore. Okay, let's move on. Skaven is complicated. Sorry for all the back and forth. Just wanted to get this information out here as quickly as possible for you guys. Even though I did do a lot of prep on this, and even still I'm making a couple mistakes. Okay, so Warp Lightning Cannon, my baby. I just finished playing something like 30 games with my current competitive Warp Lightning Cannon, competitive quote unquote, but my as strong as you can make a Warp Lightning Cannon list with full Warp Lightning Cannons. I've only literally never played Skaven without Warp Lightning Cannons, so this is like my heart when it comes to Skaven. I loved this model and unit, and I'm kind of bummed that it's been changed. It's once per turn army. Your shooting phase ability for overloading the cannon only works with one cannon now. So I think having 4 of them in the list is just dead. But I'm thinking maybe having 2, and then 2 of the new like rattling gun, warp lightning cannon thing, the warp lightning blaster or whatever it's called. That might be the way I'll proceed from now on. Maybe I'll convert my other 2 to Plague Claws. Who knows? But anyway, what changed here? A lot changed. You had your not overloading, so your non-risk version, which was 6 dice that you were rolling. So we can call those 6 attacks. And so I'm calling that the base profile here. And now it's just 2d6. So on average, you are rolling 1 more die because 2d6 on average is 7. But of course it was a flat 6. You knew it, and there was no variance before. Whereas now you could roll 2, but you could also roll higher and get 12. So on average, across many, many attempts with this weapon, you will in fact get more output in terms of how many dice you're rolling. Now, how it used to work is you rolled a power die beforehand, which could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And then all of those 6 dice that you would roll, if they matched that score or higher, including 1s, even though 1s usually fail in Age of Sigmar, they would go through and create mortal wounds. Now it's on a flat 4. So that's what I mean by the base power now is kind of like a 4-up, which on average is minus 0.5. What do I mean by that? Because the average roll on a d6 is 3.5. So now it's on a 4. So it's a little bit nerfed in terms of power. It's not a ton nerfed. And in fact, what it ends up meaning is that because you're rolling +1 attack on average with the 2d6, that on average, if you're not overloading the cannon, it has the same expected value as before. What do I mean? Well, if we look at the chart, there is no blue here. It's flat 0. Why? Because it used to be roll 6 dice and on average 3.5 of them go through, which on because your power level would be on average 3.5, so then it was 3.5. Now you roll 7 dice and it's cut in half because it's on a 4-up, which is also 3.5. So, and against different saves, it doesn't matter because it's still mortal damage, right? So that didn't get nerfed. This is one of the few shooting profiles we've seen that did not get changed into a like a profile that doesn't have mortal damage anymore, but instead has a normal attack to hit, to wound, and rend and damage. Anyway, when we overload it, it used to roll 12 dice. Now, every die that you rolled that was a 1, you would take d3 mortal wounds back, and that still is the case. But now it's 2d6 plus 6, which functionally comes up to 7 plus 6, which is 13, and therefore still plus 1 attack, which of course is not comparable to this, because this was plus 1 attack when it used to be 6, so 1/6 better, and this is plus 1 attack when it used to be 12, which is only 1/12 better, so less of an improvement. But it can spike. You could technically roll 18 dice, and then you're getting 9 that go through on average, but even that could spike, and then you're getting more. It could do more than 13 mortal wounds now, or more than 12, I should say, but I wouldn't expect it. And remember, you can only overload 1 cannon per turn. Of course, it could shoot in the with covering fire if you want, but then it's at -1 to hit, which really reduces its output because it used to not get affected by -1 to hit. So anyway, if you see, when you're overloading it, it's this right here. So it got a little bit worse on average, but again, a 4 Warp Lightning Cannons list like I had is getting way worse on average because only one of them can overload. So anyway, it is what it is. And then melee, it just got a little bit worse. It got -1 to wound, which turns into a 33% decrease in melee. But of course, again, like the Jezzails, you don't really want to be in combat. Okay, so moving on. Pit Abomination. Here we go. This guy had 3 profiles before. They all got combined. If you kind of look at what they looked like overall from one profile to the next, they functionally got a -1 to hit, -1 to wound, and attack, or sorry, +1 to wound and attack. So that's kind of like that monsterification. And then -1 damage. That's basically what happened. And the rend kind of is a mishmash of different things, because we see on this profile, it's got +1 rend against infantry. So it can get up to the 3 it used to be able to have if it wasn't bracketed. And then the old, but only against infantry. And then the other, one of the other profiles only had -1, I think. Anyway, the other profile I'm not mentioning here was the Avalanche of Flesh, which I've mentioned here is roughly at 67% of what it used to be on the bottom bracket. So comparing to the top, it's like 27% of what it used to be. So it took a huge hit. And this is not a decrease. I use different terminology here. This is saying that the actual total output is around 2/3 of what it used to be. So it lost 1/3. And then it's around 25%. So it lost 75-ish%. So anyway, Avalanche of Flesh is a huge nerf that happened to this thing. And it can only happen once per turn army, which means if you were running like Hell Pit, like spam, for some reason, you're not getting to use it multiple times because it's a rampage. But anyway, the output for the unit, unfortunately, as you can see here in the blue columns, when it's on its top bracket, so this is not its base, but it's its base in the sense that its profile when it's at its best and it's not wounded, is on average around 14% worse. And then taking its bracket on average across its lifespan proportionally weighted on what its current wounds bracketing looks like. So for the first 10 wounds, it's at the best profile, and then from wound 10, 11, 12, 13, so the next 4, it's on its worst profile, compared to the same, well, whatever it used to be with its bracket before, weighted by how long you would sit on each one of those wounds. If they you were sitting on each wound in equal amount of time, which of course is not realistic, but it's the best way to summarize it for right now. Then the average bracket, it's a little bit less nerfed, but not notably. It's a small difference. So basically, I would say on average, this thing is kind of looking at about a 13% performance decrease, not taking into account the Avalanche of Flesh, which got hit real hard. So I think the unit got nerfed quite bad. But there might be, the points might have gone down. There might be some cool things that you can do with it. Who knows? And of course, it's healing, and it's still a cool model. I like it. I just don't know if it's going to have mount traits that are going to be commensurate with what they used to be. Who knows? Also, a quick point. Someone mentioned the quality of the video looked like it was from 2006 in the last video. Sometimes YouTube loads these things in standard definition, sometimes in high definition. I don't know why it does it one way, sometimes in one way the other. I have a feeling, though, that the commenter was commenting on the quality of the war scrolls. Like if you try to zoom in on them, especially on your phone, some of these, I've just got the same screen captures that someone took of the, like this is from that game that the Lumineth versus Skaven kind of expo game that they did. And I can't get the quality of the Warscroll to look any better than this because this is as good as it came to me. But I tried to make sure I got the GW versions at least for the other ones. So hopefully the ones that GW officially shared look at least okay. But I think this was just a screen capture someone took, and then it's the one that got shared around Reddit or whatever. So yeah. All right. Oh, this is what I meant to say. This is the other thing, is he does have the +1 infantry. You see that there's a different story here with the Pit Abomination. So when he's on his top bracket, the blue, or the average bracket, you see this kind of like, it's nerfed at worst saves, but because of the rend now, it starts to actually perform better. But then if you look at the expected value average, even though he's getting that against the infantry, the +1 rend, it's still a little bit under. And then once you put the Avalanche of Flesh back into the conversation, it's still a nerf. So that's unfortunate, but at least there's good news that on the 2 melee outputs, or like the Teeth and Flailing Fist compared to what they used to be, they are actually better against better saves if it's against infantry, which a lot of times it will be. Okay, Verminlord Warp Seer. We're almost done. We're down to the Verminlords now. This is the more magic-y one. He's still a 2-caster, and instead of Screech, who's only a 1-caster, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check that in a second, of course. But anyway, this is also from that Expo game. He's not really meant to be a melee beatstick, so let's cover this quick. Him and Screech both lost their missile profile, which was a 6-inch range, wasn't much of anything to speak of, was on average 1.78 damage before, at -1 rend before save. So it wasn't getting a whole lot through, so it's not that big of a thing. But his melee profile did lose -1 to hit, but the to wound is now fixed. It used to bracket, and it's fixed at its best profile. So that is a buff, really. Especially if you look at the versus the average bracket. And he got +1 damage. But he did lose his once per game D6 mortal wounds, which I didn't take into account here because it's once per game. It's hard to equate with on a turn-by-turn basis, because then you'd have to say, like, well, I guess he gets to fight. He could fight 10 times if you have an aggressive army that can get in there, and he fights every single combat phase. And then it's only one turn out of those 10 that it's doing D6 mortal wounds. But then who knows? Maybe you're keeping in the back, and then he never got a chance to use it. So it's really hard to compare that kind of ability to static melee stuff. So I'm just not taking it into account. And of course, it was pretty swingy because it was D6 mortal wounds, and gave up his +1 save that he had built into his old Warscroll that he no longer has. But anyway, looking at the profile here, so on his top bracket, which is the orange here, I kind of switched them. I tried to do this in Excel and flip them in the last minute here, so it's a little confusing because it's backwards from what I usually do. But the top bracket is the orange, which it traditionally has been, and the other way around. In any case, the top bracket is about 13% better across all saves there. And then the average bracket is even better, averaging out to a little better than 25% better across the lifespan of the Warscroll. And you'll notice that this Warscroll does not bracket at all. So it's not even just that the one thing doesn't bracket, nothing brackets. Because I think they've got kind of like a cutoff point that monsters don't bracket if they've got 13 or less health, maybe 14. I haven't done a cross-check of all the different Warscrolls out there, but I think it's somewhere around there. And that was an idea that Jonas put into my head. So pretty cool. All right, and then the last one, my other favorite Skaven unit. I love Lord Screech as he currently was in 3rd edition, but he's changing here. Again, apologies for the graph here looking weird. He, again, like I mentioned, lost his missile profile, and then his weapon profiles, the Glaive and the Reaper, got combined. If you look at him at his top, and you kind of look at a kind of a net comparison, he lost around 7 attacks at what his old top bracket used to look like, but he got +1 to wound and +1 damage on those abilities. His once per game abilities have changed, and that's what we're seeing here. They used to only impact him. So I'm going to say, even though it might seem like a nerf, all of this stuff here is impacting all the units around him, which is pretty great. He also lost his old command ability, but which we used to give +1 attack, +1. I'm sorry, +1 to hit, +1 to wound for any Skaven unit that he chose that was within range, of course. He now can. I did take command ability to be plus all out attack. Like we're assuming he used all out attack here because I wanted to kind of get him back into the range of what he used to be. I usually don't take all out attack into account here, but obviously they're mutually exclusive. He could have never used all out attack and his old command ability. So basically, by saying the command ability profile here down in below in orange, we're comparing essentially a profile that they both got +1 to hit, but one of them got +1 to wound, the old version. So if you look, the base profile is above on like this is on the top bracket, by the way. What we're looking at now is flat out better than what it used to be. And this is taking into account the exploding hits that we got, but a large chunk of the other profiles are worse. So for example, if you use the old command ability here, he's now better if you used all out attack because of the exploding. Well, not the exploding hits don't get impacted by that, but it does still make better output, and because of his +1 damage and +1 to wound, so it does have an impact, but against worse saves less. And then this is the turn where the Reaper. So this is using the command ability, and that the Reaper did mortal wounds on 6s to hit in addition. So you'll see that compared to that profile, kind of similar story. He's actually still better from a 4-up save or better. And then when the glaive, this was his main melee turn, when he would do, he'd make the glaive for a whole battle round, 1 extra rend and 1 extra damage. So -3 and 3 damage. And that'll be the light blue here. You'll see that, unfortunately, he's just now on his top bracket worse than that profile all the time. But in general, like on base, and this is what we're seeing in 4th edition, is a lot of Warscrolls are more consistent without needing extra buffs. And that's really kind of cool. By the way, when I was comparing the Reaper max, Glaive max, I was comparing it also to the max of the, what was it? The Eshin ability here, which add +1 to the rend of his profile. So I'm assuming we used the kind of like cool melee ability. This one impacts him as well because he has the Eshin keyword now. Anyway, so if we move on to the last thing we're going to look at here, which is the average bracket. Again, taking his output into consideration over the whole lifespan of the unit. And keep in mind, he doesn't bracket anymore, and he used to bracket. So now we're seeing the same comparisons, but he's pretty much always above, except with the glaive, the one battle round that it's doing that. Now, to keep in mind that he could have chosen the Reaper profile one battle round and then the glaive profile in another, and there was also a +1 to wound profile that he could have used in conjunction with an all-out attack to make him basically have his command ability, and then give the, who knows? There are a bunch of different ways you could get this. I think on a turn-by-turn basis, Screech is a little bit nerfed from what he used to be with all of his buffs. But if he wasn't getting access to the buffs, like you gave him the heal thing or +1 to cast Unbind Dispel, then you were still on that base profile, and of course he's better now. Plus, when he's using these abilities, they're getting applied to all models wholly within 13 inches of him, which has a force multiplier ability that I still see as much better. Also, crit 2 hits on this profile with 3 damage is not anything to sneeze at, because he's getting the chance to get at least, on average, one of these is going to go through and give you another attack. And if you're all attacking him, crit 2 hits, exploding hits, is like adding +1 attack, or +1 to hit. So it's like you added +2 to hit, which means functionally, mathematically, all of his to hits go through, which means you're getting 7 attacks mathematically that automatically go through at 2+ to wound, and then you're getting this awesome rend and good damage there. And then if you're on the Eshin turn, you're even better rend. So pretty solid. All right, guys, there you have it. We did it. Sorry for the back and forth with kind of double checking myself. I'll write something in the comments here down below when I know more about when I've double checked everything. I'm going to go back to that the melee profile for the Stormfiends. But anyway, guys, I really love sharing this kind of analysis with you guys. I hope you guys get something out of this. Lumineth is up next, and I am very excited to share with you what we've got there. And then we'll be moving into maybe some user or some like public requested Warscrolls, which I'm happy to do. And that can even be after the indexes come out. I'll keep making these if you guys keep asking for them, if I can get enough people asking for stuff to make a whole video of. And then, what's it called? We'll be getting the faction focuses, not faction focuses, the indexes themselves sooner than later, I think. So can't wait for those. Guys, thank you so much for everything. Let me know what you thought of this video down below. Let's keep it positive if we can. And until next time, Ryan out.